And in a lot of ways, it keeps the tenets of combustion engine vehicles that we're accustomed to present, while Tesla is very much so a revolution and gets rid of what we're really used to and are comfortable with. What is up, guys? Today I'm sitting behind the wheel of an Audi e-tron, which is Audi's electric SUV and actually Audi's first standalone EV in general. It's now being followed up by the e-tron GT, which is a sedan, and by the Q4 e-tron, which is a smaller electric crossover. But my Tesla Model Y video has been my most successful video to date, much to my surprise, and I figured why not compare it to the Audi e-tron, because this Audi actually kind of slots right in between the Model Y and the Model X in both size and price. So let's kind of dive in and compare some of the pros and cons between an Audi e-tron and either a Tesla Model Y or X, maybe leaning a little bit more towards the Y, which I will link in the description box below and put a card up to as well. And on that note, before we get out onto the road, I want to ask that if you guys enjoyed the video, please throw it a like. And if you want to see more content like this, please subscribe. It tremendously helps out the channel. And without further ado, let's get out onto the road. All right, we will pull out a little bit more aggressively here in the e-tron. Woo, instant torque, baby. So I want to explain some of the differences between this e-tron and both the Model Y and the Model X right off the bat. So dimensionally, this is 6 inches longer than a Model Y and 5 inches shorter than a Model X. It's also the exact same 76 inches wide as the Model Y and 3 inches narrower than the Model X, but it's the exact same 66 inches tall as the Model X, which makes it 2 inches taller than the Model Y. So it really leaves it right spank in the middle size-wise between the Model Y and the Model X, sharing the width of the Model Y and the height of the Model X, but being in between the two lengthwise. Where it's not in between the Model X or the Model Y is in weight, where this weighs about 5,700 pounds, which is obviously a ton. And the Model X dual motor, which is the long-range model, weighs about 5,200 pounds, and the performance, actually the Plaid tri-motor weighs about 54. Even that weighs less than this. The Model Y, regardless of whether you get the long range or the performance, weighs only 4,400 pounds, so way less than this. And that weight difference is something you really do feel when driving either of the two cars. And we'll get into that a little bit more when I discuss how the e-tron drives. So now, before we get into those driving impressions, I want to discuss both range, which is really important obviously here with EVs, and price. Range-wise, the e-tron does pretty bad once again compared to either of the Tesla SUVs. So where it weighs way more than the Teslas, it unfortunately also gets way less range. This gets about 222 miles of range on a full charge, and both versions of both Tesla models can easily get about 100 miles of range more than that, in that low to mid 300 range, again, depending on whether you get a long range or a performance or a Plaid, an X, Y, yada, yada. But relatively speaking, we're talking about 100 miles of extra range in the Teslas, and that's definitely a selling factor of the Teslas, because that can mean an extra day or two worth of driving or an extra hour or two worth of driving, depending on your circumstances, by having a Tesla instead of this e-tron, at least in this current state. There are rumors of a much longer range e-tron coming out, and I would not be surprised to see that in the next year or two, but as of the current state of the market, that's a big ding on the e-tron. Now, price-wise, once again, we revert back to this landing right in between the Y and the X, especially as equipped. So the standard e-tron starts life at about $66,000, and the Sportback, the new Sportback e-tron, starts life at about $69,000. That's in the premium trim, of course. Here in the Premium Plus trim, a car like this one is equipped to about $76,500, $77,000, and you can get yourself into a prestige model that easily breaks the $80,000 mark and even creeps pretty close to $90,000 depending on options. So the e-tron basically lives in that mid to high 60s to low 80s range. The Model Y is way less, starting in the low 50s in the long range form and in the low 60s. In fact, I think actually exactly $60,000 in the performance trim, which takes you to the Model X in the long range form that starts at $95,000, and finally the Model X Plaid, which starts at $120,000. Now, of course, all of those prices are before any sort of incentives or tax rebates, of which there are certainly several, if not many, available, depending on your region and depending on your income and personal situation. But you can definitely recoup some money on a vast majority of EVs. That's just one of the main benefits of an EV, aside from also not having to pump gas constantly and just plugging in to an outlet, which will definitely cost less than gas prices these days, especially for the kind of performance you're ultimately getting. Which brings me to the performance of this car. So this e-tron has a 75 kilowatt hour battery, which helps produce 355 horsepower and 414 pound-feet of torque. But when you put the car into dynamic mode and put it into sport mode, you get an extra boost mode effectively, and that can briefly take power up to 402 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. So you definitely have a solid amount of power, and you get that instant torque, punchy EV, a lot of understeer, EV acceleration. But unfortunately, as I just demonstrated, you do get a decent amount of understeer here due to both the weight and the lackadaisical steering. And of course, 255 section all-season tires are doing no benefits to limit grip by any means. And I'm not going to come out here and suggest putting on summer tires on an e-tron because that might hurt range, but surely it would benefit handling and even maybe acceleration, because you have that all-wheel drive and you have a car that really puts power down well, aside from the fact that it can't corner that well. And there is a rumored e-tron S with around 500 horsepower it's been rumored for a while. I'm sure we'll eventually see a faster version of the e-tron, the same way we're getting the e-tron GT and the e-tron GT RS. So as Audi or the VW group in general moves more and more towards EVs, which we're seeing right now, we will certainly get a faster Audi electric SUV. But until that point, the e-tron leaves quite a bit to be desired when it comes to handling. And the Model Y, partially due to having a far lower curb weight, but also just off of having a bit better and more direct steering, can handle a bit better at the limit. Audi's doing their thing right now with the e-tron GT, and they will further and continue to do things with the Porsche brand, with the Macans and the Taycans. So there's definitely a good future, but right now I got to give the performance nod all the way to Tesla. Now, in some of the areas where the e-tron does stand out or maybe even shine as compared to the Teslas, are things like having paddle shifters where you can manually control your regen braking. I can be cruising here at about 45 miles an hour and press the down paddle, I don't want to call it downshift, and I go into level 1 of regen and start slowing the car down. I press it again, I go into the full level regen braking, and the car is pretty rapidly slowing down here to about 20 miles an hour. So, and the second I get on the throttle, that regen system goes away, but once again I can double press and the car slows down. So you get that kind of modular control that you certainly don't get in a Tesla. And beyond that, you get a boatload of drive modes. Here you have, I will go through them for you. Here you have an off-road mode, which lifts the car up because this has air suspension and prepares it for any sort of off-roading, let's say light off-roading. Then you have all-road for maybe rocky and slightly, like a bare road type surface. You have efficiency mode to get the most mileage possible. You have a comfort mode, which keeps the car as comfortable as possible. You have an auto mode, which can adapt as, to your driving and as you go. You then have a dynamic mode, which is what I'm currently in, the most intense driving mode here in the e-tron. It makes the accelerator pedal a bit more responsive, the steering a bit heavier. It lowers the car a bit, and if you put it into S mode, it engages that boost. So if you put your foot down, it picks up fairly quickly. It doesn't push you back into your seat quite like those Teslas are able to do, but it's still a fairly quick car for sure. Still have that immediate torque, and you feel it, especially at lower speeds. And lastly, you have an individual mode of which you can adjust certain parameters. In this case, the only two parameters you can mess with are actually you can mess with three parameters: the steering, the suspension, and the drive. In dynamic mode, you put them all, they all go into sport, and I really prefer that when it comes to a windier road. And that kind of brings me to two of the cool aspects of the e-tron that you really, really appreciate, I think, when you get into one of these. And before I even tell you these two features, what I'll say is the e-tron, to me, feels like an evolution of the car. I'm sure there's plenty of people that will see one driving around and mistake it for a Q5 or a Q7. And the point is, it looks like an Audi. Inside, it looks like an Audi and feels like an Audi. And in a lot of ways, it keeps the tenets of combustion engine vehicles that we're accustomed to present, while Tesla is very much so a revolution and gets rid of what we're really used to and are comfortable with. So you actually get a bit of a tachometer. So when you put it into either boost mode or regular D, if you put your foot down, you see the percentage of battery that you're using. So if you lightly press the throttle, you're using maybe 20-25% throttle, you go a little harder, you're using 75%, and that directly translates to the amount of battery you're using. So if you're using 100%, you're gonna burn through that range a lot quicker. And if you keep your foot a little lighter and you stay below maybe 50% of throttle, you're gonna obviously retain more range. So it's cool to even get a gauge like that to kind of get a feeling of, hey, you know, I mean, you're not shifting, but you can at least see how much power you're using, which is similar in my mind to seeing your RPMs. You have a noise or a sound that this car makes, especially at low speeds when it takes off. It's kind of like a Jetsons sound. And while it's a little bit gimmicky, it's definitely that cool, like spaceship, you know, type of noise that will both draw a little bit of attention for safety purposes, but also can at least satisfy that little bit of car enthusiast in me that wants to hear something when I accelerate off of the line. So at least I get some sort of noises here, and it's not just dead silence. Now, I forgot to mention that Car and Driver rates the e-tron 0 to 60 in about 5.3 seconds. I'm not sure if it's that quick, but we'll do a quick takeoff here and compare. Let's see. Sport mode and all the way down. Pretty quick, and 60. So, you know what? That did feel like the low fives, I can't lie. Didn't feel very slow, but again, just not nearly as fast as how a performance level Model Y will make you feel, and then I can only imagine how ridiculous a Model X Plaid then feels. Now, moving on to the looks, I'm a big fan, and I actually think this is the best looking SUV that Audi makes. Okay, the RS Q8 is pretty sweet, but I think the regular Q8 and the SQ8, not my cup of tea. I don't like the headlight design. I don't love the taillight design, and overall, it's not really doing it for me. Q7's a nice looking car, the Q5's a nice looking car, but this feels and looks like the most sporty, special Audi SUV product. And the side profile is super nice. I love the very naturally sloping roofline. It's not overly exaggerated like it is in the Sportback model. It reminds me of a Porsche Cayenne. It's really, really sleek. On the front end, you have that classic Audi styling with a faux grille that still draws and cues over to that. That was a little Audi pun, cues over to the Audi look. So it's very familiar to people that you're driving towards. And a very nice headlight design. You have sequential turn signals. In the back, you have a long extended taillight that goes all across the rear, which looks really nice. And you still get those sequential turn signals, but you have a nice LED light bar that at night creates a very nice visual presentation. Here on the inside, the e-tron hardly differs, at least here in the US, from the rest of the Audi lineup. You get the new MMI system with the dual screens here. The lower screen is meant for your climate control. You can use it as a screen to write down your destinations for whatever reason into your navigation. Up top, you have that large touchscreen. They both have haptic feedback. They're actually not my favorite system, and I think that the current Mercedes-Benz MBUX is better, and I also think the BMW iDrive system is better. And guess what? I think Tesla's infotainment is miles better as well. So this infotainment is okay. It doesn't do it for me. It's had a few moments where it's kind of acted up and not connected to CarPlay or not played my music, and it's always menu after menu after menu, and it doesn't feel as intuitive or as easy to use as some of those systems, particularly the Teslas if we're comparing it to that. But the gauge cluster up here is lovely. It's Audi's virtual cockpit, and it looks a little bit different here in the e-tron. Again, as I mentioned, you get that that battery percentage gauge tachometer versus what you'd get in the rest of the Audi lineup that are mostly ICE cars. You still get the map in the middle. You can still make it the full thing with the small gauges. It's really cool. and very familiar. Steering wheel is a little bit of a unique design here in the e-tron in particular, but again, similar button layout to the rest of the Audi lineup. Only the paddles are a little weird here because it's an EV and you're not expecting that, but I explained that they're for regen. Otherwise, the entire interior feels very, very nice and very normal, just like any other car. Again, this feels like an evolution, and the Tesla feels like a revolution. Comfortability wise, these seats are pretty good. They're very comparable to those in the Model Y. They're not quite as sporty as I personally like, and I really like when you can get rather sporty seats in a lot of other luxury SUVs. That's true of, for instance, the Q8 with an S-Line package. It's true of the BMW X5 or an X3 with an M Sport package. Here, you're kind of stuck with a little bit more of an economy seat, but because you have the Premium Plus package, you have both heated and cooled seats here for the driver and the passenger. The seating position is pretty good. You have a really high shoulder line here, so you feel a little bit cocooned in the e-tron. You feel like you're sitting a bit lower than you maybe actually are. Otherwise, the seating position is good. Rear seat legroom, fantastic. Because you don't have that drive shaft going across, you have a pretty low floor all across the rear, so you can decently fit 3 full-size adults across. Me at 6'2" can definitely fit behind myself. 3 of me across, again, because it's a little bit narrower than the Model X. It's not as comfortable as it is in a larger SUV, but you can definitely fit 4 adults very comfortably, and you can make 5 work. Trunk space is okay. That roofline is a little bit sloping, as I said, so you have a decent amount of depth, but you can't put too big of a box because you won't be able to close the tailgate. I can only imagine how bad it is in the Sportback of this e-tron. But with all that said, let's jump into a little tall boy test before we wrap the video up. So here you go. So let's wrap the video up by kind of fully breaking down my thoughts on the e-tron versus the Model Y. I'm going to stick with the Model Y in particular because I have less experience in the Model X, and again, my Model Y video that I've probably already linked up to above and in the description box below performed exceptionally well, so I kind of want to just directly compare my experiences in both cars. I would say that both cars have a specific set of pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses effectively, and there is a little bit of a price difference as well. So if I wanted the best bang for the buck, I gotta go straight off the bat and say the Model Y is that, because a long-range Model Y will outperform this car when it comes to a straight line, handling, will cost, when it comes to this specific car, about $20,000 less than this car, and it still offers you membership into the most common and largest EV network and brand effectively in the entire world. So in that sense, you're getting a lot of value. On the other hand, the e-tron still gives you a lot of the prestige and recognition of a legacy automaker. It feels very familiar, Audi inside. You get that large dealer network, and again, the loyalty of being in an Audi, so there is the pro of that, and you get that German engineering and build quality on top of all of that you certainly don't get in a Tesla. You don't see any panel gaps and as many creaks and squeaks in an e-tron, but you're paying a bit more money, you're getting inferior performance, and you're also getting inferior range. So obviously for some people those things don't really matter and they'd rather just drive an Audi, maybe to actually be different than all the people who are migrating towards Tesla. So in that sense, I think that's where a lot of the Audi e-tron buyers come. Again, it's easy. It's just like you can very quickly transition from a Q5 or a Q7 to an e-tron, and you're not jumping ship, you're just getting an EV. But the Tesla does seem to win on a lot of fronts, and if it was me personally, I'd have a hard time paying about $10,000 or $15,000 more for this than a performance level Model Y that can do 0 to 60 in sub 4 seconds, still get over 300 miles of range if you are very careful, and at the end of the day gives you that charging network, which makes long distance traveling a little easier than the Electrify America system does, at least to date. It's getting better, but I've just heard too many horror stories from even Taycan owners saying, oh, I went and this thing was broken, and it's a little easier with a Tesla. So I'm still gonna stick with the Model Y, which is something I would not have said about a year ago, but after having experienced it and kind of seen what it stands for and then analyzing the cost and some of the pros and cons, I'm going with that. But this is a super solid car, and for those who really do want to stick with a legacy automaker and drive an EV, not only will you be pleased with an e-tron, but the future is very, very bright when it comes to EVs from legacy automakers. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. New videos are dropping every single week. Comment down below, let me know what you guys are trying to see. I'll do my best to make it happen. And as always, this is Rio. Peace out.